it's your last day at work because you're retiring from the job you've loved for 12 years. The place where you answered your call to service, to offer dignity and respect to people who didn't often get a lot of that. You worked hard to get elected to your role as a New Orleans judge because as an outsider, it was unlikely that you would. Your leaving is bittersweet because you had to make peace with the fact that you were just too exhausted, too unwell, and had to focus on protecting your children from any more pain and turmoil. You had to focus on fitting the pieces of your devastated life back together. Then imagine that on that day, FBI agents show up targeting you for payroll fraud. You, a judge who had broken no law and had spent life as a nerdy goody two-shoes. And suddenly, those pieces of your life that you're trying to hold together just go flying. You're branded with the scarlet letter A for accused, and you're instantly looking at life from the other side of justice. That was my nightmare a few years ago when I was wrongfully accused of payroll fraud. And from that point on, I would experience the way in which the justice system can dehumanize people in order to further an agenda not at all in line with what we believe justice to be. After Hurricane Katrina flooded our family home in New Orleans, my family came to Boston, my hometown, to try and find some normalcy for our two young boys. There, I also found doctors for surgery that I needed because my doctors in New Orleans also left the city. I commuted between New Orleans and Boston and worked remotely in between to continue my job as a judge. Many other judges did this after the storm, but I was the only one targeted. So why was I targeted? Well, it started back when I ran for election as an outsider. I was a northerner in the South, I was only 33 years old, and I was a black woman. On top of all of this, I was violating a deeply entrenched taboo of New Orleans politics that said lawyers can't run against sitting judges. When I got to the court, I was ostracized with new policies meant to legislate how unwelcome I was. I was treated kind of in the same way some people treat those who they feel are threatening to their way of life simply because they're a little different. But I was there to serve. So I always was taught that the foundations of justice were in protecting the powerless. So I created a free legal help program and free seminars to help those people who were often outsiders too. I knew what that felt like. I knew that as humans, we all wanted to be heard, so in my courtroom, I listened to and respected all voices. So the image of me as outsider was set by the time Hurricane Katrina hit. My commute and my absence for surgery could be exploited for political advantage. To some of my colleagues, it would be worth it to see me in prison if one less judge around meant that they could keep their seats safe. The FBI, federal prosecutors, and Fox News all helped advance this. Together, they were aggressive and greedy with the prospect of nabbing a high-profile target. So they perpetuated the image of me as criminal instead of as person. You see, it was much easier to not consider my life or my pain if they called me criminal and told demonizing stories about me. And so I was trashed by news outlets trying to outdo each other by creating negative stories instead of questioning the validity of the government's narrative. One morning, I had just returned to Boston after a week of hearing cases in New Orleans, and I came out of my kid's school. I was on the phone talking to my staff, about to get into my car in the parking lot, when out popped the Fox News reporter and the cameraman from hiding and stuck a microphone in my face and started asking questions. Turns out they'd been tracking my children for months. They were filming them going in and out of school. I was absolutely livid that they were stalking my children who were just trying to regain a normal life after the storm. The feds use their own abusive tactics trying to deny me basic rights. For example, I was prevented by the agent and the prosecutor from getting copies of my own personnel files containing things like my social security number and my family data, yet the Fox reporter got them and a room in the courthouse to rifle through them. Another time, The agent and prosecutor came to my courtroom trying to strong-arm my staff into calling me out to speak with them outside of my attorney's presence. Laws protect us from speaking to prosecutors and law enforcement without our lawyers with us, but this didn't stop these guys. To them, I was a criminal, and criminals didn't deserve better. Even with limitless resources at their disposal, they chose intimidation. On top of all of this, they refused my lawyers the normal protocol of a meeting to discuss the charges against me for months, so my lawyers didn't even know what to defend. Keeping them in the dark advantaged the prosecutors. And to further throw my life off balance, one day I got a letter from our bank saying they were closing our family's accounts, including the kids' tiny savings accounts, but they gave no reason. When I went to find out about it, the bank manager, who was friendly before, just shrugged his shoulders and he wouldn't even look at me. My lawyers explained that this happens sometimes to the accused. So imagine not being able to use an ATM or write a check to pay a bill. It was frightening. Like others, innocent, targeted, and wrongfully accused, the terror I felt came not from the law itself. It came from witnessing the abuses of the law and wondering what they would do to me next. And it seems that this intimidation is a deliberate part of the playbook. So are we really okay with this trade-off for justice? Do we really want to accept terror over truth or fear over freedom? Look at the horrifying scenes we're witnessing now where governmental power is leveraged to harass others who are simply trying to live up to their potential and contribute something good to society. Most of these people will never have access to lawyers and will be completely destroyed by this use of government power for sport. Finally, after months, I learned that the theory they were building was that all of my work should have been done in the court, and when it wasn't, then I didn't deserve to be paid. The theory ignored the fact that all of my work was consistently done, and my docket was one of the most efficient in the entire courthouse. After nearly 2 years, my lead lawyer, forever my hero, ultimately got my case dropped, in part by alerting the Department of Justice in Washington, D.C., which oversees the New Orleans U.S. Attorney's Office. 2 months later, the New Orleans office, abusive misconduct there exploded in a huge scandal, and the senior prosecutor who had signed the first subpoena against me was exposed for actual wrongdoing. And she, another prosecutor, and the U.S. attorney himself were reportedly forced out. Nevertheless, I was acutely aware that for most of the wrongfully accused others, without the advantages I had, there would be no heroes, and they would face their ordeals alone and unsupported. For them, there would be unspeakable pain, and there'd be convictions. So from the ranks of the wrongfully accused, I wanted to do what small thing I could to raise my voice for the voiceless. And so I created the course I teach now at Tufts called Accused, the Gap Between Law and Justice, where the research for the course showed the familiar bullying and threats used by law enforcement and prosecutors so driven by ambition or political power. It showed how the lives of the wrongfully accused were left shattered and discarded when no longer a means to advance an agenda. We listen to ignored voices. I want my students first to empathize and to never forget the imperative to feel. I want them to remember to always tap into the common core of human existence and to feel that tug of humanity. In the end, we know that the scars left from a wrongful accusation sometimes never really heal. I've been lucky that in sharing with my class, my healing happens a little every day. But when the identity of a person itself becomes the very accusation, when a person's race, class, religion, or who they love is the starting point for ignoring their humanity and systematically and relentlessly crushing them down to nothing, then we sow distrust and we cheapen our values. The Supreme Court Justice justice once said that the most dangerous power of a prosecutor is when the prosecutor picks a person whom he desires to embarrass, and because he dislikes that person, and then looks for an offense. It is here that law enforcement becomes personal, and the real crime becomes that of being unpopular with the governing a predominant group. We cannot have justice without empathy, because injustice is cruel. And getting used to a society where we delight in using a person's identity as a starting point for ignoring their humanity is not only cruel, it's dangerous. The dehumanization and destruction that I experience do not have to be a part of our justice system. Justice was created to protect the powerless. We must continue to hold this sacred. Thank you.